Who will be the UFC's next double champion? It's been a very long time since we have seen a true champ. Alex Pereira has gotten 2 belts in 2 different weight divisions, which is very impressive, but in terms of champ, simultaneously holding 2 belts in 2 different divisions at the same time, shit, that hasn't happened since Amanda Nunes did it back in 2022 against Juliana Pena. But with how good Ilia Topuria has looked and probably is going to continue to be very, very dominant in that division, it's very likely and probably very plausible that a high-level matchup between Islam and him is coming up in the near future. So, I wanted to go over every single UFC champion's chances of going up to that next division and becoming the UFC's next double champion. Starting off with Pantoja versus Merab. Yeah, no one is talking about this one, and for good reason. They're probably the least talked about champions in the UFC period, so I don't think a lot of people would put any bandwidth into thinking about how this fight would go. And also, Pantoja still has a lot of work to do at 125, especially after Brandon Moreno looked really good with his fight against Albazi this past weekend. He could be looking for a 3rd fight and a chance to win the belt again. Kai Kara-France would also be a really fun fight for the belt, especially considering he is just coming off of a huge KO win over Steve Erceg, who just fought for the belt. So Kai versus Pantoja would be a really fun fight. But even so, I think it would be a pretty simple one. Pantoja does not have the facilities to keep up with Merab's ungodly pace in wrestling. Pantoja has really good jiu-jitsu and grappling in general, and maybe could do something off his back, but even then, Merab's pace is going to be way too much. That top pressure in wrestling is going to give Pantoja practically 0 openings to do anything off his back, and I think the strength difference is in general going to dominate the grappling exchanges. Pantoja technically has better striking. That's been shown through his fights with Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval. He can weather a lot of storms and throw in the later rounds even after being gassed from grappling and taking damage, so that's definitely the leg up he has against Merab, but I don't think that matters. Merab would definitely know that his striking is not as good as Pantoja's and would know that he has a huge strength, size, and wrestling advantage. So yeah, this one's not even a close fight or an interesting one to analyze. Merab probably wins by a really boring wrestling decision, and the funny thing is, even with all the advantages Merab has, I still don't think he would finish this fight. I'm giving Pantoja a 10% chance of winning in the event he somehow, through a crazy split decision, lands more strikes, but I don't even think I can give Pantoja a puncher's chance because he doesn't have that type of power. Merab versus Ilia. Obviously, this would never happen. They're boys, and boys don't beef. Well, most of the time. But in any case, Merab versus Ilia, I think, wouldn't be all too interesting either stylistically. On one side, you have a guy that's really dominant at one thing, but kind of shitty at everything else. And on the other, you have a guy that's deadly all over with probably technically the best boxing we've ever seen and great grappling, both wrestling and jiu-jitsu. They also train and spar all the time, so I'd imagine a really smart and technical guy like Ilia would know Merab's weaknesses and even be able to nullify Merab's greatest strength, which is his non-stop wrestling. I said in this last video, but it's really important to explain it here. Ilia would probably be the first opponent that wouldn't be scared of Merab's pace in wrestling because he's so confident that he can stuff the takedown and strike freely. Every single one of Merab's opponents don't fight like themselves because they're in constant fear of Merab's takedowns and seemingly endless shots and cardio. Ilia may be taken to the ground once or twice, but that wouldn't deter him from striking so freely. He would be so confident in his ability to walk down Merab and crack him with his boxing that there would be no freezing or thinking about his next attack. He's perfectly capable of defending the takedown, or at least most, sprawling well and controlling Merab, even if Merab bulks up to Ilia's size. And if Merab can't use his best and really his only weapon, he almost literally has nothing else. I mean, if he got rocked by Henry Cejudo's boxing, oh lord. Imagine what Ilia's boxing would do to Merab. This would be a nightmare matchup for Merab, and that's why I'm giving him a 1% chance of winning against his boy. The only way I would see this going for Merab is if he won this like Mario Batista beat Aldo. If Merab somehow just delays his doom from Ilia's hands and keeps a stalemate with Ilia and somehow the judges are just idiots, then Merab could get his hand raised, but that's going to happen like 1% of the time. Alright, finally. Let's get into a fun one. Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev is the fight of the decade. We're talking elite grappling, elite submission game, of course, elite boxing and kickboxing respectively. In my opinion, skills-wise, number 1 and number 2 pound for pound. Really reminiscent of when Volk and Islam fought, but I think the key difference here is Ilia has that killer power that Volk never really had, at least to the extent of what Ilia has. And I mean, he experienced it firsthand. And of course, I really think that power will really translate well against Islam Makhachev. And like I said in last week's video, the striking is going to be very close and stylistically and strategically very interesting. Ilya has that one punch knockout that, if landed clean, can completely shut down any lightweight, I'm sure of it. If he gets anyone in boxing range, he's putting their lights out easily, and Islam Makhachev will be no different. Islam has been compromised before by Volk in boxing range, and way back when, Adriano Martins by a nasty right hand, so even though this is the smaller man, quote unquote, coming up to face Islam, that power is still deadly, and something Islam needs to be very cautious about. As for Islam, he equally is a threat to putting Ilya's lights out. Islam Makhachev has phenomenal kickboxing and can easily keep Ilya at range, launch a high kick on the shorter man, and put him out like Volk. Ilya's been compromised before with a high kick at lightweight, and that's always going to be the threat for the shorter man. As for the grappling, we all know and have seen Islam be one of the most skilled grapplers the UFC has ever seen, but I wouldn't discount Ilya's grappling skills either. I would imagine if Ilya moves up, he would prepare a lot for the grappling, similar to how Volk prepared for his move to fight Islam the first time, and his camp would probably get Ilya's grappling back up to speed. But even then, Ilya's grappling has always been something he has had in his back pocket, and he has shown glimpses, of course, of that grappling in his fight with Bryce Mitchell and his early fights where he shot for takedowns way more often. How I see this fight playing out will be similar to the Arman Tsarukyan fight in terms of grappling sequences, with Islam pushing the pace and initiating grappling sequences and Ilya defending skillfully. Given Ilya's confidence and his claims that he can submit Islam, Ilya will also try to take down Islam and maybe get close. But in those first rounds when both guys are trying to take the other to the ground, they will realize they're at a stalemate, and this is where the fun will begin, with Ilya pushing his pressure to get into boxing range, while Islam will try to use his longer weapons to keep this at kickboxing range. And even though we're dealing with high-level grapplers, I think this will turn into a high-level striking match, considering how goddamn good they are, and someone will go down. And it's either a punch that cracks Islam and Ilya becomes double champion, or Islam shuts him down with a high kick and there is no in-between. I give Ilya a 45% chance, though he has a really good chance, I think. This is Islam's division, and he has been looking at the top of his game recently, and Ilya is now just entering his prime, but goddamn does he look good. Very close fight. Again, 45% chance. Islam versus Belal, another example of this probably never happening because Islam and Belal are boys, but if this were to happen, Islam would definitely have the upper hand. It's crazy, while watching the Leon Belal fight, I was like, damn, if Belal is doing that, Islam would have wrecked him and been double champion already. But of course, you have to remember the name, and now we have Belal on top to consider as Islam's chance to be double champion, and it would be a really good chance. Firstly, they're like the exact same size. Whenever I see them train or in videos together, they look exactly identical, same height and same weight. I'm not sure if it's Islam being a giant lightweight or Belal being on the smaller side of welterweights or both, but this might be the only matchup in this collection of breakdowns where both guys are practically identical size-wise. And then skills-wise, forget about it. Islam is probably better everywhere. His striking is world-class. Despite Belal having Canelo-like boxing, I think Islam would outstrike Belal pretty easily and break him down technically. As for the grappling, it would practically cancel out, and Islam would probably want to keep this on the feet anyways, given the skill discrepancy there. And though I think Belal is capable of at least getting one takedown on Islam, given that that's the most elite tool he has in his arsenal, and I would imagine he would shoot a lot, especially when he starts getting cooked on the feet, but I don't think he has the ability to keep a guy down like Islam Makhachev for too long. The one thing I will admit Belal may have a leg up on Islam is probably his ungodly pace. It's not like Islam doesn't have good cardio, but Belal's cardio is very, very good. And though he wouldn't be finding consistent success on takedowns and certainly on the feet, I think he would continue to wear on Islam and make it difficult for him to finish. I think this would be a pretty solid decision for Islam, and I'm giving him an 85% chance of winning this matchup, but Belal can certainly make it interesting with his cardio. Obviously, the better and more interesting fight here would be Shavkat versus Islam, and would be an extremely dangerous fight for Islam, but that's for another time. Now we get into probably the funniest matchup of this video, Belal versus DDP. Yeah, let's forget about the name here. Belal has a very little chance at beating Dricus du Plessis. We just went over how Belal is the same size as a bigger lightweight, and Dricus du Plessis can probably be in there with a couple light heavyweights. Dricus is huge, strong, and has all the power in the world. Sure, he fights like a Looney Tune sometimes, but that goofy tank would decimate a guy like Belal. If Ilya versus Islam was the highest level matchup we can make amongst champions, this is by far the goofiest. You have one guy that does practically one thing, and then on the other side, you have someone who just does everything technically wrong but still manages to pull out wins. This is goofy at its finest, but of course I'm taking the much bigger and much stronger guy here. Bilal would run into a brick wall if he tries to take DDP down, and if and when they start boxing, Dracus will catch him with something big, something goofy, and will put him down. I'm giving... shit, I forgot his name. 0% chance. Ooh, okay, let's get into something very interesting. Dracus, immediately after his win against Izzy, was called out by Alex, who wanted to get the belt back at 185, but Dracus counter-offered with a fight at 205. So for the sake of this video, let's say this happens at 205. And yeah, I think Alex is currently looking unstoppable, and despite how big Dracus du Plessis is at middleweight, Alex is a pretty damn big light heavyweight. The question really would be if Dracus can get this to the ground, which, despite how not good Alex's grappling is, would still be a tough task considering how big Alex is, and also I would imagine Alex would only train takedown defense if he ever fought DDP. Because of course, DDP would be really, really dumb if he wanted to stand up with Alex. It's funny because this matchup, striking-wise, is probably between the most skilled kickboxer on the roster against one of the least technical, correct kickboxers on the roster. So again, it would really come down to if Dracus is strong enough to take this fight to the ground, and you know what? I think he can. His takedowns are explosive, and it would be tough for Alex to defend at least all the time, and I think Dracus can, for 1 or 2 rounds, dare I say, get the takedown and keep Alex there for a while to edge out a round or 2 when he was getting cooked on the feet. But I think eventually Alex would find that opening to take out DDP if DDP wasn't constantly grappling, which I don't think he will, and would end Dracus's chances of becoming double champ. I would give this a 15% chance of Dracus pulling this off. Alex would definitely have a huge advantage in this fight, but with Dracus and how he pulls out wins out of his ass, you never know what's going to happen. And finally, of course, we have Alex versus Jon Jones. And who knows, Jon has already called for this fight, and in typical Jon fashion, if he doesn't retire after the Stipe fight, he would call out Alex for the fight and claim it's the only fight to make and really promote the fight as the fight of the year, especially with how much of a superstar Alex is right now. So sorry, Tom, let's go over this fight and see how it plays out. I actually detailed a move for Alex to go to heavyweight here, and physically, he can match up pretty well to Jon Jones if he bulks up. They're about the same height and build, or at least when Jon Jones was at 205, and I think Alex would be capable of getting to, at the very least, 245 if he really dedicated himself to the bulk and getting stronger for heavyweight. And of course, that power would be gnarly. I already think if Alex lands clean on any heavyweight or any person on the planet, he's knocking them the fuck out. So with more mass behind his punches, he could very well kill a man. And of course, for Alex to win this fight, he would have to land. And for Jon, I don't think he's going to let that happen. I said in this video, if Alex moved up to heavyweight, he would have a very similar career to Ciryl Gane, and similarly, if he fought Jon Jones, I think he would play out very similar to Ciryl Gane. I don't care how much muscle mass Alex puts on or how much training Alex does, he will never catch up to Jon Jones' grappling, and he will be put on his ass immediately. I'm giving Alex a 10% chance of winning. I still think in the seconds this fight stays on the feet, Alex can launch something to KO Jon, but alas, Jon Jones would be way too smart to let that happen for the most part. So yeah, here's the final rankings of the matchups and who I think is most likely going to be the double champion. Also, here are my personal favorite matchups, with Ilya versus Islam, of course, being on top. So what do you guys think about these matchups? Who is most likely going to be the next double champion? And are you excited for Islam versus Ilya Topuria? Hopefully that will happen, because that's going to be an insane matchup, skills-wise and just hype-wise. But again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.